Hello once again. This is Chrononauts. We are back. And I am JM, and I'm here with my lovely co-hosts, Gretchen and Nate. And once again, we're going to discuss Dangerous Visions. We've moved on to Volume 2, Part 2 of our podcast, and also Volume 2 of the paperback editions, released in 3 separate installments. This is Chrononauts, science fiction literature history podcast, and we come here about once a month, thereabouts, to discuss science fiction and the literature that we enjoy and to talk about the authors and the themes and various other things connected with the genre. And you can find us on all kinds of podcasting platforms. You can find us on Apple Music and Spotify, YouTube. We have Blogspot, chrononautspodcast.blogspot.com, and we really suggest you go there to check out some of our translations of previously untranslated works. At this point, majority are Russian and Spanish. We also have a few never before seen in proper, clean, digitized English things that we've talked about on the podcast, and some stuff that we'll do in the future. You can reach us by email at chrononautspodcast@gmail.com, and we're on X, Twitter X, ChrononautsSF. I guess, without further ado, on this really, really hot July day, let's get back into talking about Dangerous Visions. So, if you want to hear all about the anthology, and I suggest that you do, because we had a little introductory segment where we just kind of talked about how this whole thing came to pass. And what we did is we essentially talked briefly about most of the stories, well, every story really, but then we decided each of us was going to focus on 3 stories individually that we wanted to talk a little more about. And what I asked the crew is, well, can we rate the stories, or at least tier rate them? Not a standard rating scale, but my suggestion was basically A story is a really good story that you think about a lot, that made an impact on you. And a B story is, okay, they were trying for something, and it was cool, and I kind of appreciated what it was going for. I'm not sure I really connected with it that much, but at least respect that it was trying. C story, for me, this is where it gets a little weird, because I kind of felt like I maybe enjoyed some of the C stories more than the B stories, but that's the way she blows. So the C stories were kind of like, yeah, it was alright. It was a decent story. Nothing too special. I might not wholeheartedly recommend it, but I enjoyed it. And D story, just no good. No good at all. No good. So far, I haven't had any D stories, but the responses have been somewhat varied, which is interesting. And yeah, also I wanted to ask whether we think that each story is a dangerous vision or not, and how. So I think we came to some interesting conclusions about the stories in the first volume. And we also talked a lot about Harlan Ellison and his personality and how it's just all over this anthology. And you can't escape it. And the purpose behind the anthology, of course, which is to ruffle feathers and break taboos and make people question existence and make people question everything they've ever known. And lots of exclamation marks all over that, right? People responded in various ways. I think the interesting thing about this is that the remit was quite broad. And we got a large swath of people in the science fiction community and even outside the science fiction community, more or less, and how they look at things and what they might consider a dangerous vision may not be what we think of as a dangerous vision. And also, of course, this anthology was published in 1967. That was quite some time ago now. None of us were born back then. And we kind of have a different perspective now about some of these, maybe so many years later. Now, for the majority of the experience, I think I have a lot of positive things to say, and even the stories that I would consider the B stories and that, like, they shoot short of the mark, maybe a little in some way, I really respect a lot, because I feel like the authors were trying, and I'm always going to, I guess, give that a little more kudos than something that's just not trying and not memorable and just not very good. So, anyway, been a really interesting ride. I think we all had a really great time reading the stories and also talking about the first volume. So let's get into the second one, shall we? We closed off last time with Brian Aldiss's The Day All Time Broke Out. And yeah, I don't know, it was kind of an anticlimactic way to end. I think we were running kind of late then. I was getting tired or just like, yeah, I don't really have a lot to say about this. Didn't like it too much. hopefully this one will go a little better in the ending, but we'll see. We start off Volume 2 with The Man Who Went to the Moon twice. And this was written by Howard Rodman. Now, Howard Rodman is a TV and film writer foremost. And the funny thing is, if you go to Wikipedia right now and type in Howard Rodman, you'll actually be taken to a page of Howard A. Rodman. And that's not the Howard Rodman we're talking about here. That is actually this Howard Rodman's son, who is also a screenwriter and a novelist. Howard Rodman himself does not have a Wikipedia page, which is surprising. He does have a quite extensive IMDb background, though, and some of these stories where we may not have a lot to say about, I did do a little background digging, and I found some interesting things about some of the writers that did influence a little bit how I thought about this. So, Howard himself was very active from the 50s up to the late 80s, and his credits include Route 66, Harry O, The Private Eye Show, and the movies Charlie Varick, Coogan's Bluff, and Madigan for Don Siegel, as well as Naked City, both the movie and the TV series. Lots of TV movies. And he seems to have been largely responsible for the $6 Million Man, which was originally a book by somebody else, but he pretty much created the TV character and stuff. And Gretchen, as our resident Man from U.N.C.L.E. fan, you'll appreciate this. So he wrote 2 episodes, which I believe were made into a movie. So the episodes are called The Bridge of Lions Affair, and the movie is called One of Our Spies is Missing. Are these the same thing?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, I think that the film is just slightly chopped up, and I don't know how much is added or not. I haven't actually seen the film version of it, but I have seen the episodes.
And Harlan Ellison also wrote for The Man from U.N.C.L.E., right?
Yeah, 2 episodes. One of them is where he has a character named Judith Merrill, and it couldn't be shown for like 25 years because they sued him for it.
Interesting. Yeah, so Ellison has brought in a few TV writers here. Now, this I find really interesting because obviously Ellison was working in this field by then, and he knew a lot of these guys. And although some of them apparently don't seem to come from much of a science fiction background, it is interesting that a lot of them did actually get their start kind of in genre magazines, if not necessarily devoted to science fiction magazines. They've written some crime fiction. Maybe they got a story in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction or something like that. And it's interesting how seriously some of these authors might be taking this anthology. And I'm kind of going to question that mostly next episode. But I think Howard Rodman seemed to have taken it seriously in the way that he contributed a story that's pretty cool. But yeah, he wrote a lot of stuff for anthology series too. Chrysler Playhouse and Thriller, which is a good show actually. He got around a lot, and if you watched made-for-TV movies, especially in the 70s, you probably would have seen a bunch of his stuff. But yeah, this story, I've been talking for a while, so why don't I let one of you guys start then and give me your thoughts about this one.
Yeah, I thought this was great. It was really, really tender and touching. The narrator who reads the audiobook version of the story, Grover Gardner, is the same guy who did the reading of Mark Twain's Innocents Abroad that I listened to. And I'm not sure if it's just my brain conflating the two based on that fact, but I could almost see Mark Twain writing this if he was alive in the 1960s and writing sci-fi adjacent stuff. It's certainly less overly satirical and humorous than the Twain stuff that I've read and that we've covered on the podcast, but it does capture an element of that like childlike wonder and that Twain is good at, both in terms of early life experiences and late life experiences. I also really like how it captured how society changes over time and how much it can change over the course of one person's lifetime.
Yeah, I agree. I thought this was really just very bittersweet. That's really interesting about the fact that it was the same reader as Mark Twain. I do think that, yeah, this is, I feel, a very sincere story. Very much like coming from a place. I know, JM, you had mentioned that you think that Rodman did take this story and the inclusion in this anthology pretty seriously, and I think that it really shows. There does feel like a very genuine sense of, yeah, that wonder, and also the fear of being lost to time, of not being able to keep up. Yeah, I really enjoyed this one.
I didn't really make this connection before, but I mean, this is a pretty wistful story, and on the surface, this seems a strange choice for this anthology. It maybe doesn't really seem to fit.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of these
Yeah.
where they don't really have the dark and edgy tone that the rest of the anthology does, and this is definitely one of them. I mean, this
Yeah.
could be just like in any mainstream science fiction magazine and work really, really well.
Yeah. I don't think this is a dangerous vision, but I do enjoy its inclusion. I really am glad that it's here. I like that it's a sincere.
Yeah, I can see that. I agree.
A lot of the stories here, because they are pushing the envelope and they're challenging readers, can come off as a little ironic and don't really have as much sincerity, which can be fine, but I like that this one, along with the Aldous, as we mentioned in the last episode, I think they kind of are a nice little breather after the initial stories.
Yeah, I do think I could picture this in, a mainstream magazine. Not even a science fiction magazine. Like, maybe this could be in, I don't know, Harper's Magazine or something like that, or like...
Right.
I don't know, and that's fine. Works pretty well. Now, one thing I didn't make this connection earlier, but there's a few stories in the anthology that focus on childhood. And those stories, weirdly, and I don't know, maybe it's not weird, but it's the 60s, right? So it's supposed to be we're waking up to the young people waking up kind of thing, right? But for some reason, the stories about childhood in this anthology, all of this melancholy feel to them. And one of them, not this one for me, but one of them really, really got emotional for me to the point where I was severely affected. But this definitely had the melancholy. The two time periods, like the one where the character's a kid and then he's an old man, and like the wonder of childhood, right? And he had this weird experience. Like, it was probably kind of scary. It reminds me of like those Edgar Allan Poe stories about the one story about the guy going to the moon in a balloon, right? And they're like, oh, it's probably a hoax, right? But you really feel like he's got something urgent to tell you, but it's also like this mystery, right? There's this like secret known only to this kid, and he's been holding on to it his whole life. And now he's an old man, and everybody thinks he's probably a little bit senile and stuff like that. And of course, how differently they react to that. I don't know. It was interesting. And yeah, kind of melancholy, wistful. I don't know if I would actually say it was a sad story, but it just kind of had this emotion to it that I thought was good. It did remind me of Ray Bradbury as well, maybe a little bit, in the way it was told. There's very, like, rural America feeling to it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I can see that. I've been listening to an audiobook of The Illustrated Man recently, so I've had Bradbury on my mind. And I can kind of see this having a very similar feel to some of Bradbury's works. JM, you had mentioned that Poe story, and I think it also does have a feeling almost of late 1800s works that we've read. Like, the one that came to mind was Old Squids and Little Speller. There's that sentimentality that you see in that era of the newspaper stories that I think, I don't know, it just for some reason reminded me of that story as well.
Yeah. At a certain point, maybe I wouldn't have enjoyed this kind of sentimental storytelling, but I think I'm more okay with it now. It's not very long either. It only takes a few minutes to read. Some of the very short stories in this book are very powerful in their way. A few of them don't hit the mark, and yeah, there's like one or two that we might say, okay, if it had been longer and more developed, maybe I would have liked it more. Some of these writers seem very experienced in the short story format, and they seem to know exactly how to structure something to make it hit the mark just where it needs to. And I think actually some of the most successful, I mean, not all, but some of the most successful are quite short in here, that they're able to not just convey an idea, but also an emotion, right? And I think that's kind of important. Some of my qualms with a few of the longer stories might actually be there's too much idea and not enough feeling, maybe. I don't know. We'll see what we think as we go on. But yeah, I don't really have anything else to say about this. It's cool. We definitely suggest that you read it. I don't know what I give this. I honestly think I do have to give it a C because I just feel like it doesn't qualify as a B story, but it also didn't pack the punch for me that some of the A stories did. So by saying it's a C story, I'm definitely not saying that it's bad. Kind of always having to justify my weird thinking with the tier system here. But so this was good. I did like it.
So yeah, I would give this an A, actually. I really like this one a lot. I thought it was the best one so far to appear in the anthology. And yeah, I like the fact that it's a bit atypical of this and doesn't try to be excessive or edgy or anything like that. It just ends up being a good science fiction story with a very human touch.
Yeah, I actually was thinking of giving it an A as well because, well, partially I am a very sentimental person. I think that this really speaks to that. I like that it's a very genuine story, and we didn't mention that the afterward Rodman goes into talking about his father and having a very similar story of how technology changes, and I think that also really added to how really personal this story feels, and I really liked that. I really think that this is a really emotional work. I think it's pretty moving.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. I'm glad that you guys went to bat a little more for this one. I mean, again, I certainly didn't dislike it. I definitely acknowledge all of that, and I did think it was pretty good. It is really cool because, yeah, we all react differently to these, and apparently the general audience did as well, because it seems like a lot of people remember this anthology as being a little more one note than it actually is, because there's a lot of different stuff in here. But it seems like people were just so, I guess, so taken over in their heads by stuff like the Purple Wage and some of the stuff that's coming up. And there's stories like this in here too, right? And so we really do have a good variety in the emotional and idea spectrum. So yeah, good stuff. But yeah, Develop K. Dick, Faith of Our Fathers. So this is one of the ones that we chose. I think we all kind of agreed that we were going to talk about this one. It's kind of funny. I have to do this again, but PKD, where do we start? Like, we did The Last of the Masters last year, and we enjoyed that. We've all read some PKD before. I've definitely been somewhat familiar with him for a while, but by no means have I read all of PKD's work. I like it. I wouldn't say that I'm a super PKD fan, and it does kind of feel sometimes like he's one of those writers that it's cool to like, even if you're not really into science fiction that much. And while I can kind of understand that, because yeah, there's a lot of cultural stuff in there, and there's a lot of resonance with various kinds of counterculture and stuff like that, and it kind of works in that way as well. And of course, there's all the movie adaptations, which, again, people who don't read science fiction are fine with watching Blade Runner, right? It's totally cool. They don't have any qualms. But a part of me does kind of feel like, do I like PKD that much? Do I like him as much as everybody else? And sometimes I'm not sure. I did really like this, but it's got some of those weird PKD things that sometimes makes me feel at a distance from the work. But I like this a lot anyway, and to get ahead of time, I mean, I'm giving this a high score because this was pretty powerful. This kind of went into the cosmic horror realm, and we don't really need to get back into PKD background or anything like that, but I'm guessing everybody kind of at least got something good from this story, right?
Yeah, I thought this was great also. So Volume 2 is definitely off to a really strong start, in my opinion. And while I did like Last of the Masters, that definitely felt like early PKD before he really got into the groove of doing this kind of stuff, which definitely feels more like what PKD is known for nowadays. And yeah, it's got all those classic themes of psychedelics and clandestine revolutionary bands and weird metaphysical stuff. I think coming very close to Vedantic philosophy, though, it's a bit unclear if he was familiar at all with all that. He does seem to hint at Buddhism, which gets close in places, but he name checks some early medieval cleric. I don't know, it's just interesting how similar a lot of those ideas are, but he really plays with it in a nice twist that is the kind of thing that makes his stories a lot of fun to read.
Yeah. Of course, PKD is known for the shifting sense of reality that you can get through psychedelics, through this religious lens that we get here. I did like the Lovecraftian horror direction that it ends up going in. We've all read a little bit of PKD, but I was not as well experienced, really, with only Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and actually, after this, I had read Beyond Lies the Wub, which I really enjoyed. But yeah, like, this was really my first experience of what a lot of people know PKD for, and some of the tropes that will be showing up in more and more of his work. And I thought it was a really interesting story.
Cool. Yeah. Sometimes it works for me, sometimes it doesn't. Like, I'll try to get into it a little. For the most part, this really did work for me. It's interesting because in the afterword, PKD is talking about other science fiction with certain, I guess, existential... Well, that's the thing. He doesn't really mention Gnosticism, so he actually mentions Out of the Silent Planet by Lewis. But the thing I mostly thought of is the other book we did during that session, A Voyage to Arcturus. Not that the stories were similar exactly, but that the whole idea of the demiurge that we see controlling everything on our plane of existence is, in fact, some kind of twisted, not exactly copy, corrupted form of the true spiritual essence that exists somewhere else. And that seems to be something that PKD did talk about a lot, and I'm sure our fellow podcasters like the Dickheads podcast probably got into this stuff quite a lot. Entire podcasts dedicated to PKD's work, and I'm pretty sure they're not the only one. It's just pretty interesting that the man has been really covered all over the place. So a part of me actually did think, hey, do we actually want to get deep into this story? Because it's probably been done. But you know what? We should. Let's do it then. This story was a Hugo nominee. It was pretty well liked. We're coming across a few of these. So far, I think this one and Purple Wage are the ones that seem to be receiving the most accolades from people, which is fair. They are also the longest so far, which is also interesting, but again, maybe not exactly surprising. Of this, PKD himself said, I think, he said this in 1976, so this is several years later, I think I managed to offend everybody, which seemed at the time to be a good idea, but which I've regretted since. It's got communism, drugs, sex, God, I put it all together. And it's by my impression since that, when the roof fell in on me, years later, this story was in some eerie way involved. So, I don't know how serious it is about this, but I'll mention something later when we're done with the summary, which maybe goes a little bit in contributing to maybe what he thought about the anthology. Ellison is very enthusiastic about him and sings his praises, but I just kind of wonder if PKD was entirely on board sometimes. I think he was serious about the story, but I don't know. I think maybe he was a little cynical about the remit of the anthology. And from what he said there in 1976, he kind of feels a little bit twinges about this story, which I'm not really sure why. I mean, there's not really a lot of sex in it. The drugs are good for you. Communism, I don't know. Do we think that there's a reason why communism is a part of this story, other than to challenge the American readers?
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly a big thing at the time, especially in Southeast Asia with the Vietnam War, starting up with the whole domino theory of, we can't let Vietnam fall to the Soviets or whatever, or else the rest of the region will fall too, that kind of stuff. So I'm sure PKD was just imagining what a future would be like in that part of the world under communism, which was definitely on everybody's minds at the time.
So I know a little bit about this period in U.S. history, but not a ton. And obviously seen a lot of movies, and I've heard people talk about it and read some books and stuff. But I guess the general feeling, especially now, is that some people during that time were so paranoid about what was going to happen in the future with communism spreading, and that was a major reason for the war in the first place, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't so much about just Vietnam, it was about the spread of communism, which here has reached its ultimate fruition, I guess, and basically, well, we don't know that it runs the whole world, but it seems to run like the United States, for example.
Yeah, I mean, that was the idea, the whole containment philosophy. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of approaches to that, but yeah, they basically tried their hardest to prevent the spread of communism any further than where it was already going on, both in terms of active military intervention and propping up puppet rulers in various states in a lot of countries.
Yeah, makes sense. So do we think that at the end of the day, with PKD concluding this story in the way that he does, he seems to be saying, it doesn't really matter. Like, it doesn't really matter if we're communist or not. We still have the same demiurge to face, or something like that. Like, it doesn't
in a way.
In the end, it doesn't seem to matter, right?
Yeah, in a way.
Yeah.
All right. Well, try it briefly as possible. We have been trying to truncate some of the summaries a little bit. We even got sidetracked when we were talking about Purple Wage and just ended up talking about Les Miserables and James Joyce for much of the entire discussion. So We'll see how this one goes. So, Chun Chien is a minor bureaucrat in Hanoi. It's the nebulous near future, and Vietnamese-style communism seems to indeed have become the dominant force in the world at this time, even in the United States. But our story does take place in Hanoi, where Chien works at the Ministry of Cultural Artifacts. And right away, we get the sense of the bureaucracy being a sort of vicious competition of opportunism. And one has to watch their back all the time. It's got that PKD sense of paranoia that he's so known for. And at the beginning, Chien's accosted by a peddler who offers to sell him some special powders. Actually, is quite demanding about it, and the law says one must buy from a disabled war veteran, no matter what. And that's how Chien gets pulled into the underworld. So the mysterious powder is supposed to help with eye fatigue while watching endless droning sermons on television. Well, alright then. So, better than a spermaticide, which is also offered here and is not used, unlike in the former story. At work, Chien's various interactions with his superiors and a white man named Poul, who is supposed to run a school for party inductees in California. And there is a leader here, an absolute benefactor of the people, who has been alive for a century and lives in Peking, seems to be top of the party. And not many people get to see him, and it's a special privilege. So there's a sense that Chien is being set up for something, perhaps ideologically tested. Ostensibly, this is to prepare him for evaluating the American students in their examination papers to see who is responding to the programming. So the absolute benefactor of the people has handpicked Poul to run the school, and even though this will be a lot of work for Chien, he can't refuse. But to see if he's qualified, he's given 2 essays to read, one of which is demonstrably written to dissemble, and one of which is ideologically correct. And this is something that I kind of thought was really interesting, and I almost wish had been focused on a little more, but at the end of the day, I don't know that the ideology really matters in this story. It's just the background. So, but it's oppressive background, and I guess that's kind of the point, right? If Chien passes the test, he'll be going places in party bureaucracy. One of the papers is examining a poetic excerpt from the 1001 Nights. Were you familiar with this one, Nate?
Yeah, I'm not sure. There's a lot of poetry in the Arabian Nights in general.
It is a lot, and I didn't really know where to look. So
Yeah.
So the poem seems to be about death, but after, when we finish the story, we will kind of see Chien starting to realize that it might be about something else. It might be, in fact, just a poem about God. So, yeah, the essay is just some boring thing full of cliches. Crush the imperialists, all that stuff. And the second paper is on a John Dryden poem, the Song of St. Cecilia's Day. Listening to the addresses from the absolute benefactor is mandatory, and like in 1984, the television sets also have cameras, so they can see if you're paying the proper deference and attention. So Mr. Chien is specifically singled out for honor and encouragement in the broadcast. And bored and cynical, Chien pulls out the packet he got earlier, and it claims to do all sorts of cure-all stuff, but he decides what he's purchased is actually snuff, and has a nice big sniff, or 3. And actually, I guess he doesn't take very much at this point, because it doesn't last very long. So, but then right then, the big building warden checks in, saying he got a call from the TV authorities saying Chien wasn't dutifully watching TV. Well, that was a close call. When he gets back, something strange has happened. The screen goes blank, and all of a sudden, the absolute benefactor's face is replaced by a monstrous mechanism of circuits and pseudopods and lenses with a speaker in it that blares jarringly. You can kind of imagine what it sounds like, but it doesn't really say if the words changed or anything like that. I guess they didn't. It's just really interesting because, yeah, PKD describing altered states of consciousness, right? And it's like, oh, all of a sudden everything's different now. It's like the same but different. His first reaction on realizing that he's apparently taken a dose of psychedelics is to call the police. And he figures it's some kind of psychological warfare drug used by the West in the Big War. Now, I don't know. I was confused by this character. I guess it kind of made sense because a lot of the things he did were very orthodox, but his thoughts were always very, cynical and, anti-orthodox. Apparently, he grew up with this system, like he was a child already when it was in place. No, he wasn't even born yet when it went into place. So it seemed like he wasn't very indoctrinated. He was just trained himself to perform all the right actions.
Yeah, I think it's more survival than being a member, a true believer.
Yeah, definitely a survival mechanism. Yeah, I mean, I didn't quite get the character voice, I guess. It just seemed to me like sometimes he was almost too cynical about the party and everything like that in his thoughts, and he was so irritated with everything, and he was so calm and right away I better call the police and report this.
Yeah, I don't know. I think in this particular scene, he probably just did not want to get in trouble or be caught anywhere in the paper trail of what he thinks is an LSD analog floating around. And it also has the, I guess, added motivation of somebody spiking you with a drug that you didn't consent to take is a really violating and just uncool thing to do. So he probably was personally offended and didn't have any qualms about turning this guy into the cops for peddling drugs and, basically spiking him with something.
Yeah, I think even though he might have this cynical, disillusioned feeling towards the government, I think it's still that he is survival response. It's a bit of a fear response of what is this, and I don't want to be caught with it. I don't want to have this anymore. So I can see why he would turn it in.
And especially, I don't want trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. Yeah. So he's pretty shaken up, but it doesn't last long, and the cops take the rest of the drugs and some info about the peddler and his location, though he does feel oddly reluctant. Surprisingly, he gets a call a short while later, informing him that he's not a hallucinogen at all he's taken, but phenothiazine, an anti-hallucinogen. So, again, this is interesting to me because maybe I'm just so inured to conspiracy theories and conspiracy theory fiction right now, and I just feel like you always suspect that everybody's in on the conspiracy. I'm surprised that call even went through. It seemed like they would want to convince him that it's a hallucinogen, right? But then I'm not even sure how many of the upper party people are aware of the thing, the cosmic horror thing. How many of them really know about it? I don't know. It's never made clear, right? So it's kind of ambiguous. There's a lot of questioning in this story, I think, which is good. It's not a bad thing mostly, but I don't quite understand how the conspiracy works. There's always a conspiracy, right? And I don't know. I don't quite know how it works. But then, if there was a long explanation of things, it would probably drag the story down. So, I don't know. It's fine the way it is. It's just, wow, I'm surprised they let that call through, right? And it's just this thing about this society, too. In 1984, it's hopeless, right? But then when you look at this society, well, it's very rigid. You're always being watched and monitored until you aren't, right? And certain things go on, and it's oh, so they didn't watch that? Okay. It feels like the social control is very, very strong until it just isn't for the sake of the plot kind of thing. It still works for me. I'm coming off a little critical about this story, but spoiler, I'm still giving it an A, so PKD fans should be happy. But so the knowledge isn't very comforting, though, and then the doorbell rings, and in this time comes a girl, and it's one of, quote, them, the underworld people. And her name is Tanya Lee, and she's a clerk in the ministry. And she wants to know if it was the aquatic horror shape, the thing with slime teeth. She's pretty intense about it. And he says, no, it was a machine that didn't even try to talk like a man. Not any kind of simulacrum. And he's very casual about this. And then some of his responses in this seem very strange, but I think that's just a PKD thing. I think, people talk weirdly. I think that's just... And sometimes it's funny. Sometimes it's, I think, intentionally funny, right? So, some of the ways that Chien responded to things in the story almost cracked me up a little bit. He just comes out with sometimes, every so often he does speak the first thing in his head, especially when he's at the party. And it's just, okay, yeah. There's a little bit of humor going on here, I think. So everyone who takes the selazine, which is the drug, sees a different thing. And that doesn't make sense. It should be that way with a hallucinogen and not the other way around. That's obviously true. So that's just how hallucinogens work, right? But there's not an infinite variety of true visions, and there are apparently 12 of them. I don't know, I was kind of looking into this, and I thought maybe it might represent the Sephiroth in Kabbalah, which is the different creative aspects that God forms. But apparently there's only 10 of those, so I'm not really sure why the number 12 here. Again, it's one of these things we'll always have to wonder about, I guess. Yeah. Occult experts, comment in and let me know what you guys think. But yeah, I'm not sure if there's a significance to the number 12. So it's apparently not the Sephiroth. They call the thing that Chien saw the clanker. And there's also the gulper, and the bird, and the climbing tube, and the crusher, and other things maybe too terrible to name. And they want Chien to join them now, of course. The clankers are group red. They want to know what the thing, the leader, really is, and Chien might be their man on the inside. So she seems to know a great deal about him and his life and work, and she knows there's no school in California, and this thing with the exam papers is just trying to test him. And Poul is, in fact, security police secretary Judd Crane, and the drinking water is laced with Natrox-3, a powerful hallucinogen. I do also have to question, why do the underworld people have so many resources? And why does the system let Chien know what he's actually consumed? So, at first, Chien just wants to know which essay is orthodox, because apparently these people know about that too. So, she once again tries to convince him to be the man on the inside. Not many people get to see the leader, like I said, but apparently he likes to hold elite stag parties. Oh boy. Like Stalin. And yeah, there's actually a lot of Stalin parallels in this second half, so again, it's kind of weird, but that doesn't really seem to play into it too much, but I don't really understand how we get from stag parties to God exactly, but there you go, right? So they want him to stake the Stelazine and at one of these events see the leader for what it really is. So she tells him the Arabic poem paper is the Orthodox one, and now he owes them something. So they, that is the government, wanted him to fail, and now he won't. So it was less than a 50-50 chance, and now the conspirators are going to help his career along. Technically, Chien hasn't broken a law, but they'll be watching, that is the government, or should be. Has anybody seen the absolute benefactor as he really is? I'm not sure. But Chien seems to be getting into the spirit of the thing a little bit. And once, indeed, the door is open for Chien when he passes the test. As a matter of fact, he's informed the benefactor's image is adjusted, and that he's actually, the benefactor's name is really Thomas Fletcher, and he's a white man from New Zealand or something. And that's not secret, but not something that's talked about among most people. Everyone agrees, thinks Chien, even if for different reasons. Yeah, I thought that was sort of funny. So he's in faster than expected, and he doesn't think he can get the anti-hallucinogen in time, which is sort of a relief. But it does happen, and he does. It's all a bit formal, and Thursday he's to be flown to the leader's private villa on some picturesque waterway. If you're disappointed, don't show it, he's told. And the leader might drink a bit too much, or tell a ribald tale. And yeah, it really reminds me of Stalin at this point, and like, even Khrushchev had stories about being at Stalin's parties and how he liked to humiliate people and how like things got really out of control and stuff like that. Yeah, it was kind of interesting. So they'll give him some amphetamines, and he should take them because the party will go on till the next morning. And he can't avoid the dissidents, and he gets forcibly handed the Stalazine the very day of the stag party. So the atmosphere of the party is strange and decadent, with nude girls and men in suits and ties. And the clearance procedures are quite invasive, and the Stalazine is making Chien feel dizzy and sluggish. And everything's going more or less weird but okay when the great leader shows up. And it's not a man or machine, but a semi-transparent, shapeless mass that absorbs essence from whoever it comes into contact with. Maybe even more like Clark Ashton Smith than Lovecraft in some ways. But yeah, it eats and eats endlessly. And he feels like he is somehow a part of it too, which is the worst thing. And he sees himself and everyone else in the room as a pile of twisted slugs being voraciously consumed. And the mass, the leader, the demiurge itself is coming straight toward him. And the being speaks to him inside his head, and it's raving and mad. And God makes and destroys the world. The Arabic poem isn't about death, but it's about God making and unmaking. Horrified and wanting a dignified end, he tries to throw himself off a balcony, but the thing catches him. And I imagine this in the voice of the lead Cenobite from Hellraiser, but it goes, "Don't fall on my account." And the extended pseudopod starts to look like a human hand. And he says, "What I want is for you to see me as you have seen me, as I am, and then to trust me. As you live on, unable to stop, I will torment you. I will deprive you, item by item, of everything you possess or want. And then, when you are crushed to death, I will unfold a mystery." And from that moment on, he is physically marked where the thing touched him. And there are things worse than the being, but Shen will not meet them. And he tries to hit the thing and blacks out and wakes to find himself ejected from the party. So he makes it home and sits up smoking cigarettes until Tanya shows up, as he knew she would. And you get the idea he's going to be a different man henceforward. And he's not even cynical anymore. He's hateful and bleak. And he wants to kill God, but God is everywhere and everything. And he can't bear to be looked at too closely. But he wants her to stay the night. Then the night is the worst part. "Is there anything we can do to fight this thing?" she says. And he just says, "Believe in it." "But I'll do nothing. Nothing at all." His shoulder is bleeding, and he doesn't think he has much time left. And they decide to have sex again, and it's sort of beautiful still, but melancholy. And it's an interesting way to end the story. It was weird because I didn't know, like, it was almost redemptory feeling. Like, it was almost, I guess, maybe he doesn't have long left, but then again, the thing did say it would torment him for a long time. No idea, really. It just ends like that. And I guess now he knows what the leader really is, and he knows what everything is really all about. He's had his Gnostic truth. And I don't know. What kind of person do you all think he'll be now?
Well, certainly an experience like that, when you come to a non-dual realization with direct interaction with a deity, has the tendency to warp one's mind a bit and will radically change his personality and persona, no matter what direction it goes in. And I like that PKD cuts off here, and we don't really see what happens to him after this whole enlightenment period. But he's definitely not going to be the same that he was beforehand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also like the ambiguity. I know we had mentioned some other cosmic horror figures here with Lovecraft and Smith, where you get the typical protagonist who goes mad after being confronted with something so incomprehensibly grand and just something that you can't really understand. But I do like, that Dick doesn't show that. He just leaves that to your imagination and to wonder what happens to him.
Yeah, I don't know what he really meant by good and evil being the same thing. I guess what he really meant is that they both come from the same root.
Right, exactly, yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the core of non-dualistic philosophy to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So PKD does say at the end he doesn't believe in any of this necessarily, but he does take some time to talk about the perhaps value of drug experiences in terms of having religious revelations, which I thought was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, outlining a future area of research, which I don't think anybody was too eager to take him on in the formal laboratory world, but certainly a number of people have embarked on that outside of the official channels.
Well, Ellison says at the beginning he's like, meet PKD. He's the only guy who can write while zonked out of his mind and actually make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I like this one a lot. It was cool to have him play with the philosophy at the end as a little twist of what the big bad monster is actually going to be. And I really like how he brought those ideas into the story. I would also give this an A. Definitely one of the major standouts of this anthology. I like pretty much everything that I've read by PKD, and I'm glad that Ellison found a way to get him in here.
Yeah, I would also give this one an A. I really enjoy the concepts that PKD puts in here. That I do find that fascinating, the initial psychedelics leading to the same realities. I'm sure that comes up in quite a few other works that he does, or something similar. And I think that's the ending of this revelation really makes the story.
Yeah, I enjoyed a lot of this. I enjoyed the paranoid feeling through most of the story. I enjoyed the kind of tension of, like, feeling that you're always under scrutiny and you might be able to think something, but you better say something else because otherwise you'll be in a lot of trouble, right? And I think he did a really good job of that. I guess, in a way, the dichotomy between the outward-facing Chen and the inside Chen was actually really interesting and kind of cool to see because he did not really think like somebody who'd been indoctrinated, but that might just be because actually he's a pretty smart man and he's like resistant to all this programming. He knows that that's what it is, and even though he's like a minor functionary at this point, you also get the sense that the superiors also know what's going on, but he has to tread carefully because, yeah, if he's not careful in what he says, they could report him for like dissidence and stuff like that. And then the party, like as in the stag party atmosphere, was pretty freaky, pretty out there, and you just kind of imagine like, okay, he's on this weird drug and like it's an anti-hallucinogen, but it's still making him feel pretty strange. And then the ultimate revelation is pretty scary and pretty awesome. So I mean, I'm also giving this an A. Like I said, it was powerful. It was the most cosmic horror story in this book.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
we all like that atmosphere. So
I also think it is interesting almost, JM, you mentioned a couple of times 1984, and comparing it to that due to the same kind of oppressive atmosphere of this society. And I think it's really interesting that it's almost PKD saying, what if instead of Big Brother, it's worse, and it's God that's in charge of everything? This sort of threat is even bigger than what Big Brother is, which I think is a pretty neat little concept here.
Yeah, but unlike 1984, there is a little glimmering of humor from time to time poking its head out in this, which I did appreciate as well. Some of his responses eventually do seem like really off the cuff, and like maybe because he's nervous or anxious or something, and he starts walking up to this girl and he's like, "Oh, why do your breasts glow?" And like, you see a lot of that kind of gender bending. Sometimes it's done a little less subtly than here, but anyway, that's not something for a while. But the party atmosphere was pretty cool, and but yeah, we said PKD, he didn't believe necessarily wholeheartedly in what he was writing in terms of that this was a true religious revelation. But now we want to know, did PKD take the anthology seriously? So he and his friends seem to have been discussing it in a somewhat lighthearted way, I guess. If you look in PKD collections, I think the one this ended up in was The Eye of the Sibyl, which is one of the complete short stories of PKD volumes. Immediately following this is something called The Story to End All Stories for Harlan Ellison's Dangerous Visions. And yeah, that is the full title, including For Harlan Ellison's Dangerous Visions. And it's really short, it's just an outline, so I'll read it. It goes like this. In a hydrogen war-ravaged society, the nubile young women go down to a futuristic zoo and have sexual intercourse with various deformed and non-human life forms in the cages. In this particular account, a woman, who has been patched together out of damaged bodies of several women, has intercourse with an alien female, there, in the cage. And later on, the woman, by means of futuristic science, conceives. The infant is born, and she and the female in the cage fight over it to see who gets it. the human young woman wins and promptly eats the offspring, hair, teeth, toes, and all. Just after she has finished, she discovers that the offspring is God. And this was sent to the fanzine Nikas for the cost of postage, $1, and published in the fall of 1968. Coupled with PKD kind of saying he almost had some regret for writing the story. I was kind of wondering, maybe he shouldn't have skimmed through it as much. Maybe he should have read the Rodman story. Did he really think this anthology was just weird sex and blasphemy? Is it really mostly weird sex and blasphemy?
I don't know if it's mostly. It's definitely present. But I'm sure in putting together his entry for this, he had to deal a lot with Ellison himself. And I'm sure elements of Ellison's personality came very clear to Dick as far as like what he wanted to appear in the anthology. And while I haven't read that follow-up, I could definitely imagine him wanting to poke a little bit of fun at Ellison himself, given that he is a very large and loud personality.
Yeah, definitely.
Overall, the anthology itself, more varied than what PKD is making out. But yeah, I think perhaps PKD, seeing what specifically Ellison may have been looking for, what he may have been encouraging, or what his ideas for the anthology were, he may have gotten the idea that that's what the anthology was all about. It checks quite a few of the boxes of some of the stories that we will see in this anthology.
Yeah, I think some of this may, in fact, be a commentary on Ellison's personality, but also, so there's so much Ellison in this, and yeah, the authors give their afterwards, and there's some joking around from both sides in a couple of cases, but for the most part, we're not getting people's feelings about Ellison from this, and they were contentious, to say the least, right? And they remain so. Some people I've even seen some comments about Ellison getting so angry about things that were said about him that he would write, threaten people and stuff like that. At least in writing, if not in person. But apparently he did get in a lot of fistfights, but I don't think there's any record of him actually trying to beat up a fellow science fiction writer. But yeah, we're not getting a lot of the other side, I guess, in this.
Yeah. The most that you can get of people's feelings about Ellison himself is perhaps just the amount of effort it seems that they have put into the stories, or the ideas that you find in the afterword, their justification for certain stories being in this collection.
Yeah. And I definitely think that perhaps the reputation of certain stories in this anthology kind of override the entire discussion in a way, or have done traditionally. And I hope, actually, that with this podcast, I know we talked about how much this book has been given coverage lately, but I hope we actually do help to broaden the scope of talk of the anthology, because, yeah, it's not just about a few stories that stand out. There's actually a lot more going on here. And, yeah, the whole dialogue between Ellison and his writers and everyone else is really interesting. As we kind of alluded to earlier, not all fandom was pleased with this anthology, and some people were, if not shocked by it, maybe they would say, no, I wasn't shocked, I just felt like it was trying too hard to shock. There was one particular reviewer, I can't remember if I mentioned last week. It wasn't the woman from Philadelphia, that was just some letter that he got, but this was somebody who actually reviewed the anthology in a fanzine, and she was somewhat unimpressed, and she did a full review of the anthology. There's some interesting discussion around this whole thing, both then and now. The next story we have in the collection is The Jigsaw Man by Larry Niven. And yeah, I didn't really do my due diligence here. We were just talking about some of the authors that were unknown to us earlier before reading this, and Larry Niven is a name you hear a fair bit, and most readers of science fiction at least have a vague idea of who Larry Niven is. I haven't read a lot myself, mostly just short stories, actually. including this one, which I realized I had read before in a collection of his. But I've not read Ringworld or any of the other novels that he's written, and I didn't really look up too much about him. Apparently, he helped to finance this anthology, and Harlan Ellison seemed to think he has a lot of money lying around. I don't know if that was a joke or not. So, Nate, you read Ringworld, right?
Yeah, I read Ringworld, I read The Mote in God's Eye, and I read another one of his short stories that appeared again in that World's Best Science Fiction Anthology from 1970, Death of Ecstasy, which was actually like a really, really cool sci-fi detective story, like very noirish in tone.
Nice.
It'd be cool to do some of that stuff on the podcast at some point. But
Yeah.
this is from a couple years earlier, and it's very, very much early in Larry Niven's career. I don't think he had like a whole lot out at this point. Certainly none of his major award-winning works were out at this time. So, yeah, it's an interesting one for sure. I think it's interesting how it ties in with real-world technology of organ transplants. And it's fascinating to think that this was also relatively new technology at the time.
Yeah, he seemed to have felt very serious about it.
Yeah.
I must say, I'm very confused by what he's going for with this story. I don't understand at all. I'm kind of like, this is the perfect example of a B story for me, because I'm just so like, I know that you're taking it very seriously, and this is gritty dystopian. I almost see this as being part of some like futuristic noir film or something like that. Like maybe not the whole film, but a specific sequence from the film where the guy's in prison and all this, and like,
Right.
I don't know. Yeah, it was interesting for sure. I enjoyed reading it, but yeah, I'm a bit puzzled by it.
Yeah, I think he definitely tries to extrapolate on current technologies like organ transplantation, which the first organ transplant was only in 1954, a kidney, and the first artificial heart wouldn't be implanted until 1969. So it's not only very early for the technology in general, but it's just amazing how far we've come since then. But also the whole like nudist angle that plays a small part in some of this, like seems like he's trying to.
Some people are modest about.
Yeah, but yeah, it seems like he's trying to extrapolate on social trends there. Like I think a lot of pearl clutching was going on in the media of how people were wearing less and less clothing and more covered up, like
which Sturgeon was very into.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is my first Niven. I haven't read any short stories or any novels by him. I really think it's interesting just how alarmed Niven is. I think it's really interesting to see his extrapolation here, and even to go so far where the beginning of the story is him, the narrator, discussing the invention of blood transfusions, and that sort of being the starting point for this really dystopian society that Niven has created here.
Yeah. It's interesting. So I just kind of made this connection now because I was talking about how I wasn't sure about what he was trying to say about capital punishment. There's this whole section where it seems like he's on a soapbox, like he gets on a soapbox, and I'm not quite sure what he's soapboxing about exactly, like why he's saying this. But then it kind of connected it with something we talked about in an earlier episode, the fertility episode, and how we were kind of talking about how there were a lot of positive sides to modern, I guess, technology and how it was shaping the world of alternative parenting and stuff like that. And there were a lot of reasons to believe that that was kind of cool, but there are also a lot of reasons to suggest why it's pointing in a eugenics direction and why it's also maybe not so cool because it's very expensive and who are the kind of people that are going to be affording this. So we're looking at a story about correction here, and there's a couple of stories about. There's the Maui system, right? And then there's this. We're thinking about the prison system. We're thinking about what's going to happen to people who basically have their rights taken away from them, right? And what kind of experiments are going to be done. You know, you can picture the warden sitting these people down and being like, you guys have done wrong, but you can still be useful to society. Just sign these papers. I can see, I guess, why he feels like this could be a gruesome future. I do think it's charming how, I don't know, some people on Goodreads seem to complain about this, like it's bad. I just think it's kind of charming how some of these authors envision all these changes happening in the next 20 years. Like,
yeah,
they're thinking like, oh yeah, by the 80s, like, we're going to be fucked. It's weird because I guess when you think about the 1960s, like, things were changing. They did seem to be changing pretty fast, right?
And it's always hard to predict how fast major changes in society or technologies are going to come into effect.
Yeah.
Sometimes science fiction authors get it way too quick, sometimes way too slow, and modern day technology eclipses where a lot of people were predicting it would be by this time in their stories. So
I think a lot of them kind of get it right, but they get it right like at the wrong time.
yeah, I mean, that's what I mean.
Right, okay. It's like they're less far off in their predictions than you might think. They just missed some of the steps because, yeah, it's taken us longer to get to some of these places, but we're kind of there now in a lot of ways. We're kind of closer to there than they were in their time. It's just, yeah, it made me a little different, but like there's a story coming up, the John Sladek story, where I just think that's fascinating the way that that's done, right? And
Yeah.
that's not for a bit yet, so I won't spoil it, but we're going to talk a bit more about that one. And I don't know, I guess my one issue with this story, though, besides a little confused about its message, but then I'm starting to get it a little more the more I think about it. And I guess that's a good thing about doing this and like really sitting down to talk about these stories. And I'm still going to say it's a B story because I'm just not feeling it as much as Larry is, but it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree it's a B story.
Yeah.
It's not like a total masterpiece, but I had fun reading it. Both of I guess his extrapolation with technology, the message he's trying to send is a bit muddled, but again, he was a young writer and probably just did not have a lot of coherent stuff.
Now, there's some really good writers in this anthology, but I don't think Larry Niven, that is something I did want to add also, is I did find the writing to be a little clunky and like overwritten in some weird ways. Like there's an entire sentence describing the way a bed is a part of the cement floor or something like that.
Yeah.
Just like, why?
Yeah.
You could say that a lot more concisely. It's not like poetry or anything, so it doesn't feel like it sings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The prison escape and the adventure stuff was kind of fun, though, so I enjoyed that.
Yeah. Yeah, I enjoy the romp the story goes on. I also agree this is like a B story. I think it's a good story. I enjoyed reading it, but I wouldn't say this is the best of the best in this collection. But it does make me want to read more of Niven in the future.
Yeah, that one Death by Ecstasy that I read in the World's Best 1970 was pretty good. I don't know if I'd say I like these two stories better than the two novels I read. Ringworld is, I don't know, I thought it was okay. It has some cool ideas, but it feels a little bit thin in some areas. And Moten's God's Eye, again, it was like way longer than Ringworld. And I'm just not the biggest fan of military science fiction to begin with. So, I don't know. I would definitely like to check out more of his early short stuff for sure, where he's kind of restrained to a much lesser word count, but also has the room to play around with some of these ideas and might make them feel a little bit more complete as opposed to a full-length novel where some of the characters feel a little bit flat, as it doesn't really matter nearly as much sometimes in some of these shorter stories.
We get to revisit my man, Fritz Leiber, and we got a story here called Gonna Roll the Bones, and I believe this was a Nebula winner, and it's kind of interesting because to me this is not a very science fiction story, and that award generally is given to more, I don't know, it feels like more of a science fiction award than the Hugo. So, alright, lots of feelings about this. It's Fritz Leiber, so I have this kind of predisposition towards feeling a connection with it. I think the story has great atmosphere, but I've always been a little bemused by it, and I've read it a few times, and you know what? I think I like this because I can read this story many times, and I'm still kind of bemused by it, but I'm oddly fascinated by it, right? I just have so many questions, and it's just so, I don't know, like a contrast to Larry Niven before. Like, just the writing here is just so, it just pumps you along, and it just feels so, it's got such atmosphere to it. Questions I have, like, why is Joe such an asshole, right? And I listened to a podcast about this earlier, a week or two ago. I think it was the Wheel of Genre podcast, and they talked about this story, and they were a little less familiar with Leiber, and yeah, I must have read this story maybe half a dozen times in my life, like since probably the late 90s. So this is a story that is quite familiar to me, but at the same time, I'm bemused by it, so I keep reading it, right? Like, I keep reading it again, and I remember things differently, or a little bit like, oh yeah, that. I think the story is different, And I think this is a dangerous vision, possibly for Fritz himself. I think that's how this story might be a dangerous vision. I think most of the dangerous visions are looking outward. They're looking out at society. They're looking out at the future. They're looking at what's going to happen when we meet aliens, what's going to happen with artificial intelligence. And this story is totally looking inwards. This story is looking at a person who's struggling with addiction. And the whole thing could be a hallucination. There's, again, this whole weird thing with the witch wife. And that's this theme that Leiber keeps returning to about the women in his life and his fascinations with trying to understand each other and stuff like that. And the domestic situation in this story is not great. In the end, it's like he decides to go home the long way round. And so is he going home at all? Probably not, right? And all these questions just sort of add to the intrigue and weird nature of the story. And there's the gambling scenes are really, really tense and weird. And I feel like this stuff was probably a big influence on Stephen King. I can just feel like, yeah, he kind of wrote some stories that were like this, but they were like kind of an imitation. Like, I don't have much bad to say about Stephen King. I think he's good for what he is. And I respect that he would not hesitate to tell you, oh yeah, I was inspired by such and such a writer to write this, right? Like, he's never held back about that. He's not like one of these guys who's like hoity-toity about his influences and just like acts holier than thou with being a literary author and all that. And he's never been like that. He's always been very down to earth about it, which I appreciate. I don't know if he's ever talked about Fritz Leiber. I think he might have mentioned him a couple of times. I might have come across something. I don't know if he ever talked about this story, but I definitely kind of got that sense. I don't know. I have a few things more to say, but why don't I shut up for a while and you guys can talk. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, generally speaking, I enjoy the story. This is my second time reading it. I previously read it in the Best of Fritz Leiber collection that I have, the Del Rey version that I mentioned before. It's definitely got some cool atmosphere. It feels like Leiber pretty much distilled the worst aspects of his personality into one character here. So in some ways, it's kind of amusing to see just this like terrible, shitty person getting into no good. There is an unfortunate use of a racial slur that is removed from the Blackstone audio version. So I'm not sure if that's also the case in the recent Blackstone edition that came out a couple years ago that J. Michael Straczynski put together.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't actually get to see the text there. But I think that blemish aside, it's a really, really effective horror story. Again, not really much to do with science fiction, aside from maybe the setting of the town of where it is, wherever it is.
He does refer to that, but it's a weird thing that he does where it's almost like you're open to being like, oh, is this just some like Wild West story, right? Is this like some Western story? Because even in the same tense sentence, he does it over and over again. He mentions like some vaguely futuristic rocket type thing, but then he'll like say, oh no, it's like a Western, like a dusty old town, and like he'll mix the genres within the same sentence. And it's just like, yeah, it could be either thing. Which kind of makes me wonder, like, I don't know, is Joe already in some kind of limbo? Is he in some kind of purgatory? Like, it doesn't matter what genre the story is in, it's just like a story, right? And it could be a Western, it could be a crazy sci-fi story. Whatever matters is that he's fighting the devil, right?
Yeah, I mean, I pictured this as one of those, like, planetary romance space western type towns that you'd see the heroic side of in a Lee Brackett story, but here you get to see the seedier underbelly of what goes on in the gambling halls and with workers at the mine.
Yeah, I was definitely picturing something similar. I think also thinking of the crossover with Leiber with fantasy as well as sci-fi, I kind of had this idea of maybe a town similar to a fantasy setting. I also really enjoyed this story. JM, you had mentioned this is a more internal story about looking at like dangerous visions rather than an external societal dangerous vision that we've seen in a lot of these other stories.
It's really interesting to me that nobody else seems to have interpreted it like that. Only Fritz.
Yeah, I really think because no one else really seems to have done it, it is a really unique story in the collection. So I think it sticks out and is pretty memorable because of it. Even though I don't really understand many games and casinos and stuff, I always like a good gambling scene. And I think that the gambling done in this story, that scene is really a delight to read. It's pretty tense. I really think that Leiber captures that atmosphere really well.
Yeah. You're spending the time with this main character. You kind of root for him in a weird way, but yeah, I mean, you're also, I don't know, I was wary about him from the start, right? I mean, like, first of all, nobody really that I picked up on, like, this doesn't get commented on a lot, but he's talking about, like, just killing his entire family, right? He's talking about basically ending it all in a family suicide, right? Like, that's a thing that he has in his head that he's thinking about doing as this story goes. And he gets lured by the lights of the gambling, and he has a special ability. He can throw things really well and got a little bit of magic in him, and he guards this magic very carefully. It does a bit have the sword and sorcery kind of feeling to it, too. I think there's a really interesting way of writing this. Like, I think some of Delaney's later work is, like, weirdly classified as sword and sorcery, but he uses it as this weird way to explore, like, internal conflicts and stuff like that. And I kind of feel like that's what this story is. And I don't know, like, I feel like Leiber wonders if he could become a person like this, right? Maybe it's all this slaving away for nothing, and yeah, like, all I really have is my addictions, my drinking, my gambling, and stuff like that. Like, I think there's a weird vulnerability to it, but also at the end, like, seems like somehow he's managed to win out through his special magic, right? And he doesn't have to kill his family; he can just go the long way around, and maybe after 100 years of crazy adventures, he'll come home. It's got a certain power to it. And yeah, so for me, this is an A story. Even though, yeah, I've always been puzzled by it. I've always been a little bit put out by some of the racial language. Like, Leiber doesn't do that normally, again. So I think it's kind of, yeah, this is weird Joe Slaughtermill, the average man really down in the dumps kind of thing. But also, like, yeah, maybe there's a little bit of personal touch to just how low someone might feel that they could go in a way. And so, yeah, weird story, weird and kind of powerful.
Yeah, this is a B story for me. High B, probably. Not quite on the A level, but I did really like it a lot.
Yeah, that's fair. I always said it wasn't one of my favorite Leiber stories, but weirdly, every time I read it, it kind of goes a little up in my estimation. So, I don't know. Yeah.
Kind of thinking, because it could go either high B or low A. I feel like I might go with high B, almost A, though. I really liked the atmosphere that Leiber sets up. I think that it's a really interesting story in terms of how it interprets the theme of this anthology. I would say that there maybe are a few other stories in this collection that are stronger. So I think, yeah, like, I would say B.
Cool. I can definitely see all that. And I definitely think this story is a puzzle. And I don't really know that I would have said it was an A story if I had read it for the first time now, doing this anthology. I might not have. But again, it feels weird because, yeah, this is a story I must have read half a dozen times, right? So I'm kind of coming at this a little differently, not necessarily better or anything like that. It's fascinated me enough that every time I see it come up somewhere, I'll be like, oh yeah, I'll read that again. I think it's mostly the way it stuck with me. The next story we've got is Lord Randy, My Son, by Joe L. Hensley. And this is another story dealing with childhood. So, Joe L. Hensley, briefly, Indiana man. Joe Hensley got involved in fandom at a very young age and was straight into the U.S. Navy after graduating high school in 1944. And he became a journalist during the Korean War. And then he earned his law degrees and was a practicing attorney henceforward. But as is the main character in this story and a lot of the other stories that it looks like Joe wrote. His career is a big deal, actually. He was elected county representative and served 2 terms as a circuit court judge starting in 1975. He did publish 20 novels and collections, including a series about an Indiana judge. They say write what you know, right? So his last novel was published in 2008. So yeah, he was going for a bit. And this story is definitely heavy on the melancholy. I quite liked it. What do you guys think?
I don't know, I wasn't really too into this one. Thought it was a little bit trite at the end. I don't know, I kind of appreciate the effort, but it didn't really resonate with me.
I thought it was pretty good. I think that the ending, I could kind of see where it was going, but I did like the bit of a switch that was being set up there. We see this child who we think may be this messianic figure or much more of an angelic figure who turns out to be more of an antichrist than anything else. I enjoyed it. I think that it felt like perhaps one of the more you said melancholic. I think that that's a good description, but I also think pretty jaded stories, I guess, is the word I would describe.
Interesting. So it's weird how I put this sort of in the category with the Howard Rodman story, but also one that's coming up a little later, which is kind of stories that feel like they're connected very much with childhood. And this one didn't quite hit me like the next one did, but I think this was very good nonetheless, and very sad. And although things look like they could be all right for some characters in the end, it really makes me think of the Jerome Bixby Twilight Zone episode, It's a Good Life. Only here, the kids are kind of poised on the edge, or we're not quite sure if he's going to become a monster or not yet. But with all the hurt and hate he feels in the world, it seems like he might. And Daddy will live, but Lord Randy, my son, seems kind of like a promise for the future. And I think, for me, that's a dangerous vision because it's kind of like the second coming, perhaps. And Henley did call this a religious story in the afterword. So, yeah, I really like this. There was a real poignancy and sadness to this that worked for me. And to me, this story is a lot about perception because you have this kid, he's not understanding anything we're saying. He's nonverbal, basically. He doesn't talk, at least hardly at all. But as the story progresses, he is starting to talk more. But the thing is, you can tell, and it's not from his perspective, but you can kind of tell he's been absorbing a lot of things, and he's been learning a lot of things, and he hasn't felt the need to communicate verbally because he's kind of somewhere else, right? He's kind of like, in his mind, that's where he is, right? He's a little kid, so he's like lashing out against things sometimes. He killed the kids that tormented that poor old man, but then he also made the dog better because the dog had some kind of brain injury or whatever, and it was making the dog go crazy, and he could tell the dog was hurting. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to make the dog better. And when he finally realized his dad was hurting, and his dad had cancer, so the story is kind of from a dad's perspective, but it's not a first-person narration. And dad has cancer, and dad is dying, and he's kind of working as much as he can, but he knows he's got not much left. Mom's committed suicide because when he was in the womb, he did something to her because it was hurting, and he didn't want to leave. And he was like, yeah, he's like a tiny infant, right? Lashing out, and he has this power, and it's totally like that Twilight Zone story, but that one, the kid is so far advanced in just being this absolutely like in control fiend that nobody can resist, right? Oh yeah, I'll bury you in the cornfield or whatever, right? There's kind of this hint at the end of this story that it might go that way, that even though the kid has been a Christ-like putting hands on and healing, he's also absorbed a lot of the hatred and nastiness in the world. And I don't know if it's dad's perspective. Maybe this story could have told in the first person. It could have been maybe a little more poignant. I'm not sure, but maybe I'll ask you guys that in a second. But I just think that, yeah, like there's a hint at the end that there's something ominous. Randall is going to become Lord Randy eventually, right? He's going to use his powers for some kind of perhaps dictatorial aim. I don't know. I don't think Jesus really ever asked people to call him Lord Jesus, did he? I don't know. Like,
No, I don't believe so.
I give this one A. I think this was good.
Yeah, this is a C for me. I wasn't really into it.
I think I would give this one a B. I did like reading it. I think that there are aspects of it that I found really interesting, but I think it's a little below an A for me.
All right, fair enough, fair enough. Fair enough. This is really interesting and cool. I'm really enjoying this, that how we see some of these a little differently, and that's good. If we all said the same thing, we would be, a much less interesting crew. Next story, though, is Eutopia by Poul Anderson.
Yeah, so we covered him once on the podcast before, the man who came early from 1956. So this is a little bit after that, but they share some similar themes where a traveler from a far, far away land or time meets a bunch of Nordic warriors and pisses them off and has to fight for his life in some way. So I thought that was kind of interesting how they share that similarity. Harlan Ellison in his introduction doesn't really tell us any useful or truthful information about Poul Anderson, so there's really not much insight to be gained from Ellison's comments on his writing since the last time. But yeah, I, generally speaking, enjoyed this one. Again, it's not another masterpiece for me, but it was an interesting romp with some thought experiments thrown in.
I can kind of guess why you wanted to talk about it, though. A little bit, maybe. I mean, we'll get to that, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought this is a good one to cover. In general, it definitely brings up some things that I'm sure made people uncomfortable at the time reading it. The very last twist at the end there.
Yeah, so, I mean, I liked it. I like Poul Anderson, but there are times when Poul talks about stuff in a non-story way where I'm a little bit suspicious now of what he's saying because of various things. Like, I guess sometimes his politics come through and different things come through, and this story has, I don't know, I'll save it till the end. I don't know. I have some thoughts, but I think in general he handled this really well, like, considering, right? And I say that, like, as somebody who enjoys his writing and his stories. I just read one of his stories in a Sword and Sorcery anthology that I thought was fantastic. It's a fantastic story about Vikings and this weird curse and stuff like that. And I really like Poul Anderson, but yeah, I mean, every time I read an introduction by him or comments by him or something like that, I have to kind of be like, what do you mean by that? Yeah, his politics, he's definitely a little more on the right side of things, comes across as things sometimes with his, he was one who supported the Vietnam War, I believe. So there's something I'll bring up after this because it was an interesting thing in Galaxy magazine where they actually polled the writers to see where they stood in terms of the war. And I don't know, it feels like a way to establish battle lines. Like, I think now I can see a lot of people would have probably complained about them doing that. Like, yeah, like you're just trying to make everybody mad at each other. And it probably worked. Yeah. It probably worked, right? So, I don't know. I like Poul Anderson. I think I mentioned this when we did The Man Who Came Early, but he was reading an introduction to one of his books. It was one of the things that made me start thinking about the author and thinking about, like, sometimes maybe I just want to read the story and not necessarily know everything the author thinks, right? Like, maybe I don't want to know that all the time, right? And it's funny because when we're doing this on Chrononauts, we kind of get into that stuff a little more than some people do.
This one just didn't really resonate with me too much, actually. I don't know if it's because I really just wasn't as intrigued by perhaps some of the world building that Poul Anderson was setting up. Yeah, I feel like this just didn't really capture my interest too much.
Yeah, I like this one a little bit better on the second time around. Yeah, the world building is a little bit basic, which we'll get to in a second. So our story revolves around a Iain Philippou from an alternate history Greece called Eutopia, and he's an interdimensional traveler who finds himself in another alternate history European version of America called Westfall, where the various European nationalities have their own countries in America, fragmented and at odds with one another. So he's managed to offend the alternate Norsemen and is fleeing, unable to talk his way out of things and basically running for his life while pursued by these angry Norsemen to get back to his loved one. He seeks refuge among the Hungarians in addition to the political entities being an alternate history type thing. So is the development of technology, with Iain being far more advanced and the other societies having a hodgepodge of past, present, and future tech that is unevenly distributed and unevenly developed with respect to our current technological continuum. So Iain has traveled the stars and among other dimensions, and alternate histories, and spends a good amount of time reflecting on that. And indeed, a good chunk of this story is more or less that kind of interesting thought experiment on alternate histories and how civilizations can progress or not progress. After convincing the voivodeship to guide him to safety, which I always thought was more of a Polish title than a Hungarian thing, so either Anderson is introducing more alternate history or unable to keep our own straight, Iain makes another social faux pas, and the Hungarians only very reluctantly help him out now. But he gets there fine and meets up with another pseudo-Grecian, and it turns out that Eutopia is boring in Eutopia, which is why they're there in the first place. So he says, quote, "For what we enjoy at home we pay dearly. We do not allow ourselves a single unthinking, merely felt impulse. By excluding danger and hardship, by eliminating distinctions between men, we leave no hopes of victory. Worse, perhaps, is this, that we have become pure individuals. We belong to no one. Our sole obligation is negative, not to compel any other individual. The state, an engineered organization, a faceless, undemanding mechanism, takes care of each need and each hurt. Where is loyalty unto death? Where is the intimacy of an entire shared lifetime? We play at ceremonies because we know they are arbitrary gestures. What is their value? Because we have made our world one. Where are color and contrast? Where is pride in being peculiarly ourselves?" So after this little spiel, he returns to the interdimensional gate to his lover, the boy Nicias de Mustenu. So the little twist at the end, which I'm assuming is why Harlan included this in here, as it's really the only kind of taboo breaking thing in the story that mirrors a lot of the power imbalance, same-sex relationships from the ancient world that you see in some Greek and Roman works. So yeah, again, this is probably a B story for me. I wouldn't say it's like first-rate masterpiece or anything like that. As you alluded to, Gretchen, the world building is rather simple and basic, where you're just taking historical urine companies.
I thought that aspect was really interesting. The different paths that things took, like, neither of the paths talked about are really the one we know, although it is alluded to, and it's kind of like portrayed as a nasty path, so it's kind of interesting, because he's seemed to have spent time in what's probably a world very like the one we know, and that wasn't very good. So yeah, we get to see this kind of like Viking America, Utopia, right? EU the way it's supposed to be, and that's the Greek civilization flourishing for thousands of years. And he seems to be saying, well, maybe we need each other, even though things turned out differently and things are different. It's not necessarily wrong or bad. Yeah, I mean, this is why I like the way Poul Anderson thinks about stuff in his fiction. It feels like I get it a lot of the time, but he does the afterwards to this one, and he talks about being, I don't know what he's referring to specifically. He talks about being accused of being a fascist. So I remember reading in the Novelli book about Astounding that we haven't discussed for a while, but we were doing a whole bunch of stuff on Astounding, so that stuff really came up. And they talked about that whole Vietnam War business and the feud that was going on, I guess, a little bit. And at one point, Anderson referred to protesters with a pretty nasty homophobic slur. And I kind of wonder, because he says being called worse than a fascist could happen because of this story, right? And I don't know. I do enjoy his writing quite a bit, actually, and I did enjoy this story. But yeah, for me, this is a B story because I didn't think the twist was too badly handled. This is also a story I read several years ago, so I knew what was coming, and I can't honestly recall what I thought back then, which is sad because I wish I could. A lot of the times I can, but it's just a passage of time, man. The passage of time grows wearying. This would have been around 2001 or something like that when I probably read it for the first time. I don't think Poul handled it too badly. I think we're seeing a little of that kind of subversion going on in this anthology. It's usually coming from the outside, I guess, but not always. But it's just kind of interesting because, yeah, Poul Anderson seems like very calmly willing to go along with this and know that, yeah, well, we're probably going to be kind of sympathetic for this character. I mean, we can kind of see what shoes he's in, and we can kind of go along with it. And yeah, he kind of makes it work. So I don't know. I liked it.
Feels less exploitative than pretty much all the other mentions.
Yeah, this is by far one of the better pieces of representation, although the bar is pretty low at some points in this collection,
Yeah.
but definitely not the worst here. And yeah, like you were saying, Jam, I mean, we are technically really supposed to sympathize with this character. And of course, there is the age gap that we get here that is also the case with some of the Grecian relationships in general. But besides that, I think that this is still handled in a way that's not as bad as some of the other instances we see in this collection.
Yeah, I did really enjoy the atmosphere of the story. I think Poul has a very solid, I don't know how to describe it, like it's very readable. I definitely enjoy like the pages turn whenever I read something that he writes. Even some of his kind of drier science fiction stuff like Teo Zero, it bursts along pretty well, and yeah, the twist wasn't so bad. I don't know. It's a really interesting piece, and I do think that probably this would have been perceived a little differently by some of the readers. And yeah, there's back then, I mean, there's some weird stuff in the anthology even from Harlan. Some of these stories, you definitely feel the vintage that they have. And, you know, when we did Roberta a little while ago by Margaret Sinclair, and I stood up for her, and I'm like, I like Margaret Sinclair. I think she's a very solid writer, and maybe she didn't do the best job at portraying what she was trying to portray in that story, but it was still pretty well written, and for a very short story, it conveyed what it wanted to. This, in a similar bracket, and yeah, there's another coming up. This definitely wasn't as bad as that, and this is pretty good. I really appreciated the alternate world aspect of it, and the path that could have been taken. I really like that, and there's not much of that in this anthology, so
yeah,
it was cool. I enjoyed his kind of wandering through the landscape of this new 20th century America, kind of, whenever it was supposed to be. I mean, it doesn't really matter, right, because it's an alternate path, but it's a sideways in time trip, so like it'd be equivalent to now, but like it's different, right? And it seems way more pastoral. It seems like, I don't know, the society developed in a different way, but yeah, I guess what he decides to do during this is criminal there, so yeah, it's really bad for him. He has to be on the run, and so we're with him. We're with him all the way, and good luck, and hopefully he and Nikki have a bright future ahead. Yeah.
I don't mind the representation of queerness in this story, given the other options that we have. And
yeah,
I also think there is potential in the alternate reality idea. But yeah, this one just didn't really click with me, so I think I will rate this one a C. Not necessarily because I don't think it's a good story, I just think for some reason this one just didn't really make much of an impact for me personally.
Yeah. Now we're going to talk about the two stories by David R. Bunch.
Yes. David R. Bunch was born in Lowry City, Missouri on August 7th, 1925, growing up on a farm. He attended Central Missouri State College on a scholarship where he majored in English and minored in both physics and social science, earning a bachelor's degree. He continued his study of English and American literature with a master's degree from Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, and pursued a PhD there. He finished up all of the coursework but left before writing his dissertation to attend the Iowa Writers' Workshop. Outside of writing, Bunch worked as a cartographer for the U.S. Air Force. When it came to his writing, Bunch was prolific and wrote in both prose and poetry. In Ellison's intro for his stories, yes, stories, because Dangerous Visions contains 2 texts by Bunch, he writes that Bunch has written in over 40 magazines. And this includes a variety of both sci-fi and literary magazines, and both fan magazines and more official publications. It makes a lot of sense that Ellison was drawn to Bunch's work and wanted him included in this anthology, as Bunch's work was pretty controversial, meeting with very mixed reviews. Amazing and fantastic, both under the editorship of Seeley Goldsmith, published multiple stories by Bunch over the late 50s and early 60s. These include several in the Moderan series, stories set in the titular society where humans have replaced most of their bodies with metal, the land is coated in plastic, and war is the most common pastime. The fan mail coming in during this period was divided on these stories, with many vocally bashing Bunch and begging the magazine to stop publishing him. I read some of this mail myself, and it is really entertaining to see writers chime in as either bunchophobes or bunchophiles. I think it was mostly in Fantastic. When I was reading through Amazing, I didn't really see much, so I thought maybe Ellison was exaggerating a bit during his intro, but then looking into Fantastic, you get a lot more of it.
Yeah, I was looking at his ISFDB record, and he has, like, tons of the Moderan stories.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I found an almost complete collected fiction, I guess, and there's a lot of stories that are not part of that, too.
Yes. As far as I see, there's actually been, like, no official complete compilation of his work or even a record of his work. It seems like he just had so much published over so many different publications. It doesn't seem like anyone has a real, completely certain record of what he wrote.
Yeah, I heard about David Bunch for the first time through somebody that I haven't talked to in a long while, but we used to chat sometimes about music and science fiction, and he was into some pretty awesome stuff, and we both liked R.A. Lafferty, and he was really into Fiasco by Stanislaw Lem, and he told me that's the Lem book that I should read, and yeah, that was really awesome. And he name dropped this David R. Bunch, and I'm like, who the hell is David R. Bunch, right? And I knew about Dangerous Visions, and I'd read a lot of the stories from it because I'd come across them in other places, but I didn't realize that David R. Bunch was a part of this anthology at that time, and I kept hearing little things about him, suggestions that he might be a little bit more on the experimental side, and that he might have some tendencies that we're not used to seeing in science fiction, and yeah, I mean, I can sort of feel that already. I haven't really got around to reading much of the other stuff yet, but I did read the intro that he did to the Moderan stories, which is kind of like in-universe, and also the first few stories. And yeah, there's definitely a very unique voice going on here.
Yeah, I actually had heard of Bunch before getting into Dangerous Visions because I had the New York Review Books reprint of the Moderan collection, which was originally published in 1971. I think this is from like 2017, and it has an intro by Jeff Vandermeer, who compares Bunch to E.E. Cummings. So it's kind of like we get to see, very similar to Philip Jose Farmer, sort of someone who seems to have some modernist influence. But yeah, the two stories that are here in Dangerous Visions are Incident in Moderan, which is obviously a Moderan story, and The Escaping, which is not considered a Moderan story. It was not collected in the Moderan anthology or the Moderan collection back in 1971, and it is also not in the 2017 version, which has like a couple of extra ones.
Because he kept writing them through the 80s, right?
Yeah, he had a couple in different magazines in the 80s. So the New York Review Books has the Apocrypha section, which is some of the stories that were not collected in the original collection here.
Yeah, I'd definitely like to check them out someday because I really liked these two stories.
So he's the only writer in the book with two stories?
Yes.
This happens twice, I believe, in, again, Dangerous Visions. Gene Wolfe and somebody else gets two, but they're pretty short. Both cases, they're pretty short. I will say, and this is probably pretty predictable, I thought the first story was very cool. I appreciated everything about it, the world building. It was very concise. I got a real emotional sense from it in a very short time, and it was a very small piece of the world, but it was effective. The second one, I don't know what to make of that, so I guess we'll talk about it. I don't even know what to say, right?
I feel like that seems to be a pretty common consensus, or at least I know you had mentioned, Jam, watching a few of the Wheel of Genre videos on some of these stories, and it's very interesting to see that one of their favorite stories was Incident in Moderan, but they did not care for The Escaping at all. I personally do prefer Incident in Moderan. The emotions in it, as you were saying to JM, I really like them. I really like the
That's cool.
contrast between the narrator and another character in the story. But I also really like The Escaping, and I like the poetic prose of Bunch, which seems to be something that is pretty central throughout other works of his. I did read the entire Moderan collection, and I really enjoyed it. I like also the accumulative effect of the Moderan stories. But I also did read some of the stories from another collection that he published in the 90s just called Bunch, which are non-Moderan stories that also have a very interesting sort of poetic quality to them.
I'm not sure which of these two I like more. I really liked The Escaping a lot. I really liked how it was good at portraying these weird, surreal scenes, and also a look at madness, presumably induced by criminal justice and excessive imprisonment or long imprisonment, with all the other stories. Well, there's a couple in the anthology that do some very basic musing on criminal justice concepts, like the Malley system, like the Jigsaw Man. Maybe one or two others touch upon it too. But this, despite the fact that it's very short and very strange and out there, feels like a much better exploration of that topic than some of those other stories who are just trying to make a off-the-cuff point.
Yeah, I guess they're another example of very short stories that seem to convey something very pointed and very narrow, but do it in a way that's extremely successful. And so, yeah, I really do think there are a few authors in this anthology who are just excellent at this format. Do we want to talk about the stories individually? The Moderan stories, interestingly, have been described as military science fiction. And I mean, I can kind of see that from this story a little bit.
Yes. I feel like it becomes very clear in the rest of Moderan that it's very focused on war and on the military, essentially. I think that Bunch really does a great job of satirizing
extreme war mindset.
Yeah, and also like this toxic masculinity that is seen through the sort of warmongering of our central character. And also, he does very interesting things in the other Moderan stories when it comes to relationships between like men and women and the family. Yeah, rereading this story after having read the other stories in the collection was also a neat experience here.
Do you think like this story being part of a series puts it at a bit of a disadvantage in this anthology, though, because most people aren't going to, especially back then, they weren't going to get their hands on a Moderan collection, and they might be kind of like, oh, okay, it feels a little disconnected from everything. Like,
I still think that Incident in Moderan stands on its own, and I think that's the case for a lot of the Moderan stories, where Bunch can drop you right into the action, and I don't think it takes away from the story if you don't know all the details about the world.
So, cool. Let me see if I got this straight about Moderan, or Moderan, or however you want to say it.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how to pronounce it. Nate, you said that you read the audiobook. Do you know how it's pronounced in
I'm pretty sure he calls it Moderan, but...
Okay. Well, we'll say Moderan. Incident of Moderan. So the Moderans, right, they live on this world, and the world has been kind of decimated, and the thing is, they're mostly cybernetic, so they can, I guess, make war on each other as much as they want and destroy as much of the planet as they want at this time, and they'll probably survive. And there are also Moderans who are less cyberneticized, who are the lower class, and they're kind of like more human, right? Or am I reading that wrong? Yeah.
Moderan, which is the area, the people who are the highest class of people are called like the new metal humans, the new metal man, which does include the warmongering class. And then you have people who have less and less metal that have been integrated into their body.
Yeah, and so it's a class system with the warlords at the top, and they're mostly machine at this point.
Yeah.
The other people have just enough to live, I guess. They probably have a bunch of implants, too. Their brains are still, I guess, not artificial. I don't know. It kind of makes me think of one of the possible visions of the Cybermen from Doctor Who or something like that, and what they basically represent. And I definitely got that from the one story. Reading the early stories in the intro, it also made me think of First and Last Men by Olaf Stapledon, because of how it's commenting from this very, very future time and saying like, oh, both the flesh people of now and the Moderans, like, they're both things of the past now, right? That now it's the flesh people of the 20th century are all fragile and they got a lot of things wrong. But then you look at these Moderans and they're a step further on the evolutionary plane. They're not quite where we are now. Let's see, we can see how they did things and how they possibly went wrong or what they may have done right. And, it was very Stapleton-ish to me, with the kind of Stapleton that we haven't covered on the podcast yet, but I've been threatening to make Star Maker a host choice for a long time now, so I don't know. We'll have to get to that at some point. Or maybe First and Last Men. They're difficult books to talk about because they have no characters, and the whole book feels like almost, especially First and Last Men, it just feels like this is taking us through the evolution of man for millions of years from now, being 1930 or something, 1931 or something like that. Almost exhausting to talk about because there's just so much stuff. So, we'd probably have to come up with a different approach if we ever wanted to really talk about that kind of a book. But anyway, yeah, this was like a glimpse at, I guess, the future evolution of humanity. And it doesn't sound so good from here, but I think there are points of light in the Moderan stories, though, right?
Yeah, you do get certain moments of humanity and of beauty. They're very fleeting, but they're there. Since they are pretty short, I thought that I would probably summarize both of them at once, and then we could maybe discuss them a little further.
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
All right. So, incident in Moderan begins during a truce, a rare occurrence. This is because one of the strongholds, the term for the warring zones in this world, had malfunctioned, and the other strongholds were waiting for them to recover, not out of pity or mercy, but out of the opportunity to destroy them even further. Our narrator, a stronghold master himself, while beating one of his subordinates for merely something to do, catches sight of a man approaching across the plastic landscape. Unlike the stronghold people, this man is mostly flesh instead of metal. He tells the stronghold master that he's come to thank him for the truce, for having the decency to pause the war for him to bury his son. The stronghold master, confused by the concept of decency, disillusions the man, the so-called flesh bum, as to the purpose of the truce, and warns him that the blasting is starting up again soon, heavier than before. The man, realizing he had come to thank the narrator for nothing, begins to cry, and doesn't move as the truce comes to an end. Bombs from the neighboring stronghold rain down and obliterate the man, while the stronghold master doesn't even try for tears for the flesh bum, too happy to be warring once again. And the escaping is less clear plot-wise, more enigmatic. However, our narrator describes himself as a chained man in a tank, and he appears before a crowd of people while blowing up and tying to himself balloons. His chains are hidden within the tank when the crowd sees him, and the group of people want to make sure that he is still chained, and cut another hole in the tank to see the chains, pulling them and part of the man out through that hole. However, while the narrator goes through this experience, while he performs his unfulfilling tasks on the earth, another self exists in what he calls an egg up in the sky, and he says that it goes fine there, and means fine there. So yeah, very short little stories, but I think both of them are really powerful, really pack a lot in there. These, I think, are the shortest stories in the collection.
I believe so, yeah. I definitely really like both of these.
Yeah, I think this was weird because to me this was like a preview. And this just to me felt like, here, read more Moderan stories, right? That kind of felt like that's what this was doing. And it was weird because none of the other stories in the anthology really did that. It was strange. I appreciate this being in here because finally read David R. Bunch, right? Find out what David Bunch is all about. And now I really want to. I want to read not just Moderan, but all these other stories with the really bizarre experimental titles. Like, what is this, right? I want to know, right? But I did feel this was kind of emotional. It kind of had that melancholy that I feel, again, coming back to that topic where I feel like some of the strongest stories in this anthology turn out to be the saddest ones. And maybe that's weird. I don't know. Maybe everybody agrees. I haven't a clue, really. Despite all the commentary on this book that we've been looking at and everything coming up to this moment, I still can't say there's really a huge amount of consensus about anything, really, which is one of the really interesting things about doing Dangerous Visions, I think. And yeah, I'm glad this is here. Again, it's just a snapshot. To me, it felt like the world building was good, and it told me that I wanted to read more. So yeah, I mean, after that snapshot, I'm really interested in reading more. So you're going to add him to the list of writers who kind of intrigued me, coming across them in Dangerous Visions. So for me, that would include Miriam DeFord and Chris Neville, and maybe to an extent Howard Rodman and Joe Hensley, right? These are authors that I didn't know anything about. So I'm kind of glad they're here because, yeah, I was in cast as tentacles far and wide for different authors here. And I think probably in 1967, David Bunch was new to a lot of people too. And now I don't hear a lot of people talking about him. So reading a couple of those other Moderan pieces in the introduction, like, yeah, I am pretty pulled in. I want to know what this is about. So, yeah, I mean, this was good. I guess it's an A story for me, but with the caveat, it kind of feels like cheating. It's like the preview of Moderan almost. I guess David Bunch himself chose this to give to Dangerous Visions. I don't think he was paid for it. But do you think that this was a good choice to introduce to Moderan?
Yeah, even though I have read all of the Moderan stories, this was the first story I did read. I only looked at the Moderan collection after finishing up Dangerous Visions, and I think it really does intrigue you, and I think you want to know more about the world. Something that Bunch really accomplishes is he is really great at creating a vocabulary for the particular world. He has so many different phrases and terms that continually come up in the novel. It almost feels a little bit reading Clockwork Orange at times, although not as perhaps extreme as the writing of Clockwork Orange, where you have to decipher it a little bit. And I think that there is something in Moderan where these certain terms continually come up, and they do come up in Incident in Moderan, where you have some of the examples in that one is the main character refers to his flesh strips, and he's a new metal man, and they do refer to other people who have less technologically enhanced, I guess. They do refer to them as flesh bums throughout the collection. But I think it's really interesting that you see that at play in this work, establishing some of the world building that I think can stand on its own, but I think it also entices you to read more if you enjoy this story.
Yeah, I'd certainly definitely like to check out that collection. I think these are both A stories for me. I really enjoyed both of them.
Yeah, these are A for me. It really led me down a Bunch rabbit hole, so I really like both of these stories. I think that if Farmer is a bit of a Joycean writer in this anthology, the writer that I associate a bit with Bunch is almost a Beckett. I feel like the sort of tragicomic feeling, especially of Incident in Moderan, the desolate landscape brings to mind Samuel Beckett's work to me.
Yeah, I can see that.
That's really cool, yeah. The escaping, then? I'm honestly not sure what to say about it. I read it a couple of times, and I still think I'm not sure, I'm not saying, a story has to be about something, or it has to be... I'm definitely pretty open-minded. This one was really short, so it's not like it hurt me or anything. I just have no idea. I mean, is it a creature in a tank or something like that? It feels like that's what it is. I don't know.
I thought it was just a guy in a tank that is just having these fantasies about how he can get away after being in prison for however long, and just driving him mad.
Yeah, I really enjoy the interpretation that you have of this, Nate, of it being in the vein of Malley System and Jigsaw Man, is speaking about incarceration and punishment, the justice system sort of stories. I was looking at it as allegorical, perhaps, but maybe that's because I was seeing Beckett very clearly in I really like to think of that in that connection that this has with the other stories of people being punished.
Yeah, definitely. And it explores the theme in, again, a very abstract way that is surreal and strange, but it conveys a lot in the very short word count.
Yeah, I mean, aside from the opening paragraphs of Purple Wage, which, like, I think would stop a lot of people dead in their tracks. This was the most abstract kind of like, I'm not really sure what I'm reading kind of experience that I had with this. And Purple Wage managed to resolve itself, and this just ended. So I'm not sure. How much did I really get from this? Like, it was an interesting experience, and I kind of felt like there was some weird emotion and, like, elation in how he was describing, I guess, the experiences of this entity. And I don't know, the escaping, I guess. Like, the title seemed appropriate, but I'm not really sure why, right? Like, I'm not sure what was anything actually taking place. He just imagining the escaping? I don't really know, right? I feel a little overtaxed by this story. Like, I just don't know. Right? This is the first time this has happened on Chrononauts. I'm just so puzzled that I don't know what was happening in this. I don't know if I'm supposed to care what's happening in this, or if it's, for the first time, I'm at a loss, honestly.
Yeah.
So,
my first read through of both, I liked Incident in Moderan from the first time reading, but The Escaping, I feel like I did have to go back and reread to really appreciate it more.
That does help with a lot of things. Like, yeah, I definitely have learned over the years that people are just so impatient, right? They're just like, they can't get something the first time around, they throw it in the corner and don't want to come back to it, right? That's not fair, right? So I'm definitely not writing this off.
I remembered reading someone, I can't remember which review or someone said this, that reading Bunch can be sort of a bit of taxing experience where you kind of have to draw out the meanings a little more than other sci-fi writers. And I think that The Escaping is a pretty good indication of that, of perhaps having a bit more of a challenge of understanding exactly what Bunch is writing about.
This is certainly not a story to summarize, because the story itself, what is it, a page long? 2 pages? It's not very long.
Yeah.
So again, it really doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
It's not like I'm sitting here suffering because of this story. It's not like that at all. I'm just not sure what I've read. I'm kind of intrigued by it, but yeah, maybe that's good unto itself, right?
Yeah, it's very short. It definitely feels more akin to a bit of a prose poem rather than a story.
Yeah.
The writing, to me, just reminded me of Beckett's work in some of the tone and some of the tropes that are in, especially Moderan.
Well, I've definitely got more to explore, and one thing I can definitely thank Dangerous Visions for is turning me on to a couple of writers. I'm definitely not throwing aside David Bunch because of this. If anything, it makes me want to know more about what he's doing. So, but it's just kind of a weird thing in Dangerous Visions because, yeah, the first story was a preview for a world to me that I want to get more involved with. The second one is a story that I don't really understand, but like you said, it might not really be a story in the conventional sense. It's not like, oh, we're starting here and this happened, which led to this thing. Like, it's not like that. And I get that. And I appreciate that. But it weirdly just, again, left me feeling like I just needed to read more stuff. I guess that's okay. Man, I'm going to have to give The Escaping a B because I don't know. It was aiming for something, but it lost me a little bit. But again, it's so short that it's just this experience of reading this story and feeling like the creature, maybe it was once human, but it's not now, probably. It's in these layers of obscurity. Maybe it's like a liquid. Maybe it's like something solid, but transparent, kind of. That's what made me think of a tank. And it had these weird associations in my head. Like, I kind of started thinking of the Candlemass song, Born in a Tank. And I started thinking, like, it was cool. I was like, I kind of appreciated that. It felt like something I'd have come up with when I was really high or something like that. Like, just written down this weird, almost like a scene, but it's not even a conventional scene because we couldn't act it out or anything like that. But yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting. Is it a Dangerous Vision? I don't know. No clue. Maybe it is. It's an example of one of those stories of science fiction has come a long way. Science fiction is not Hugo Jorn's back and amazing stories anymore. American science fiction is definitely something else now. And yeah, David Bunch and people like that are leading the way. And you old fogies had better wake up, because that's the way it is now. I'm just speculating of the feelings I got from it. This weird elation. I thought of almost like an experimental text subject or something like that. Like, I'm really just guessing, right? That's the cool thing about this story, kind of. Yeah, like it's almost like not even a full thought. It's a mood that gets you sort of associating with different things and being like, if you handed this story to 10 random people, what would they make of this? It's super interesting, though. I don't know. I kind of liked it. But yeah, I'm going to give it a B story because I want to read more Bunch, and I will. I have this collection, and I'll check out the rest of Moderan. But also, yeah, he's written so much other stuff, and it sounds weird and interesting. So, yeah.
I definitely recommend the rest of Moderan. I think it's a really good collection. It's really interesting that Bunch had taken all of the stories he had written over about a decade and a half and placed them into a narrative. Sometimes it doesn't work as well. It can get a little redundant at times if you're reading them back to back. But I think that overall, a really, really good collection.
Cool. All right. Well, let's move on then. Next up, we have James Cross with The Dollhouse. And James Cross is really Professor Hugh Jones Perry. What a very Welsh-sounding name. He was apparently really worked in military intelligence, but also academia. And pretty high-profile PhDs from Yale and Columbia. He was born in England, and he seemed to have moved to the United States fairly young. And he did write some thrillers and such under the James Cross name, but not a lot. Certainly less fiction than Mr. Joe Hensley, a Right Honorable, or whatever you want to call him. And yeah, this one was fun. I kind of liked it. Was it special or dangerous? Yeah, I don't really think so.
Yeah.
This is a C story for me, but it's good. Like, I enjoyed reading it. But I think the idea that the American dream isn't all it's cut out to be, and like chasing the dollar at every opportunity doesn't seem like the greatest thing to do. I don't know that was that dangerous by 1967. I feel like
Yeah.
No, Sinclair Lewis was talking about it 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Arthur Miller and people like that beat James Cross to it by quite a way, and he was kind of trying to justify himself in the afterward, explaining why it's a dangerous vision. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. I appreciate you trying to convince us.
I feel like the concept of the failure of the American dream has been around for a couple of decades at this point. And also the style itself. I feel like I could pick up a copy of Weird Tales and this would be in there. I think that this is just like a fairly average story. I don't think it's very dangerous at all. I would give this one a C.
The ending could have gone in a couple of different ways, but yeah, I agree.
The only thing that maybe could be at all potentially dangerous is maybe there's a little bit more violence than I would have expected from a different story, but even then it's not very intense or extreme, so I think this one's just like, okay.
Yeah, I give this one a B. I did like it. It wasn't great or anything like that. It felt very much like a Monkey's Paw variant where there's tons of those.
So this is one story where I would say like this story could have actually been written like 30 years earlier. Interestingly, some of the stories we can say, oh, this is ahead of its time, or this is this and this is that. And this story feels like it could have been written almost any time in the first half of the 20th century, right? I don't know. I mean, yeah, the scenario is pretty cool. I liked how he made the main character, such a dick, like, unrepentantly. Yeah, I mean, this is not really a guy that you'd want to hang out with. This is just really annoying. He's so obviously inquisitive, right? In his dealings with people, he's always thinking, like, oh, how can I get my leverage up there and make sure, like, I'm the top dog, right? And it's obvious where he's going with this. And, yeah, he shot Pongo. What a guy shot Pongo. I don't know. You shoot Pongo the cat. Pongo the cat's just trying to do his cat thing. Why would you hate Pongo? Anyway, I mean, this could have gone well on the Twilight Zone, which we say a few times on this podcast. This is the kind of story that they would have done, for sure. And I could picture, like, Rod Serling having picked up a story like this. And yeah, I mean, we've got some authors. Henry Sleezer is coming up, and he's got some Twilight Zone teleplays and stuff. And, like, we see this a bit in this anthology. And this is one of the guys that Ellison pulled out of his hat who's not really involved in the field. And it seems like most of his books and stuff like that are thrillers and stuff. He didn't write a lot of fiction. It seemed like he was mostly busy with his professorial stuff and being a PhD and all that. Sociology and I don't know what the military intelligence stuff is all about. I guess it would be mysteries, like writing under a pseudonym, kind of like Cordwainer Smith. But this guy is like more of a, not necessarily SF writer, I guess. And I definitely feel like this story was more mainstream, not SF, really. I guess, again, I'm kind of like, this feels like somebody Ellison pulled out of his hat just to be like, yeah, I'm getting people from outside, right? And like, good for him. But I'm just not sure. Sometimes it goes well, but sometimes I'm like, yeah, maybe that's not the best person to have in Dangerous Visions. But I'm not really complaining because I did enjoy reading the story. But yeah, C story for me in that classic sense where I did kind of enjoy it, but like, I've read a lot of things that are kind of like it. This social commentary aspect, I get it, and I get that it's still relevant, but people have been doing that long before Professor Perry. All right, well, now we got Sex and or Mr. Morrison from Carol Emshwiller. And yeah, Emshwiller was born in Ann Arbor, Michigan, 1921. And Ursula Le Guin said she was, quote, a major fabulist, a marvelous magical realist, one of the strongest, most complex, most consistently feminist voices in fiction. She's written a lot of short stories and novels, published in all sorts of places, and she's somebody that I've kind of been looking into a little more lately, and I think, Gretchen, you said you have as well, and
yeah.
I'm really interested in this story because, again, I feel like this is not science fiction by any stretch, but, I mean, maybe it is speculative fiction because it's all speculation. Second reading, I think I decided that it's actually quite effective. And it's speculative fiction, I suppose, because very literally the narrator is sure doing a lot of speculating right up until the very end. And it seems to be a story of voyeurism and obsession. It was a little bit creepy. Like, we're only getting the one perspective, and it's so full on. Like, we're right in there in her perspective, and it is kind of really confrontational in a way, because you're kind of thinking all this time when you're reading, how does her obsession see her, right? And I guess she's kind of wondering that too, and she's wondering it with this, like, intensity. And this is a really weird story. I kind of liked it. I don't know. I struggle with how I really feel about it. So I read a bit of Emshwiller before, and yeah, I mean, her early stories seem to be more sort of science fiction, often with a kind of a domestic feminist twist to them. Gretchen, I'm not sure what stories you've read. I kind of was not exactly going in chronological order for once, but I was looking at the first volume of her collected short stories, and it starts in the 50s. And it does seem like in the 60s she got a lot more weird and a lot more experimental. I don't know if you have any thoughts about her as a whole, that how much you've read so far.
Yeah. I read a collection that is called Moon Songs, which has a good amount of stories in there. It might be about 10 or so, maybe. I can't remember the exact amount. They are out of order. They aren't in any chronological order. I don't know what the logic of the order is, so I can't really say how I feel about the sort of development of Emshwiller's style over time. I did enjoy those stories. There are some really interesting ones in there, and I like her style. I do like in this story the way that Emshwiller gets into the mindset of this character. Even though I feel like this one isn't one that I enjoy as much as the other works that I read by her.
Yeah, at first I didn't think so either, but I'm not sure. I kind of want to say it's a B story because I'm not sure I really connect with it, but at the same time, I think maybe that's connecting with the Dangerous Vision aspect in that women aren't supposed to have these kind of thoughts. very uncomfortably intimate.
Yeah.
The obsession that she has is very notably, and it's done very differently than Farmer, who kind of just like dwells on it and how disgusting it is, but like the subject of her obsession is a very, very large man who like stomps around upstairs all the time and moves very slowly and is really big and like not muscular, you know, and she's obsessed with that aspect of him. She's obsessed with his corpulence and his breadth, and the material side of his being, right? Just so it's. I can see how probably some of the old science fiction readers read this and are like, "Wow, that's disgusting! What the hell?"
Yeah, it's probably a B story for me. I did enjoy the comic grotesquerie of it. Don't really have too many comments on it aside from that, but yeah, it's an interesting piece. Certainly one of the more interesting pieces in the anthology that I don't know. Again, yeah, like you said, it doesn't really have like a lot of overt science fiction elements. It's just this kind of weirdness, uncomfortable feeling.
Yeah. It leaves a sort of ambiguity near the end. There is a weird concept. The way that sex, specifically between like male and female type sex, not sex as an act, the way that that is approached in the story is kind of odd. And you're left not really knowing whether the character that the narrator is interested in is human. There is a bit of an ambiguity, although I lean more towards that it's just a human that she's obsessed with, that she's kind of warped into this other being. I would probably give this one a B. There are some aspects of it that are really strange, and I feel like I have a bit of a mixed feeling on them, but overall, I do like the style of this, and I like the style of the other works I've read by Emshwiller, which I think that the collection I read is maybe some of her later work. They definitely feel a little more experimental.
Fair, but I mean, I actually love how passionate this story is. It's not like this story is super sexually explicit. It's not, but it's just the raw passion of it is just kind of overwhelming. And I feel like that's kind of a confrontational aspect of it, maybe. And so maybe when she heard the Dangerous Visions remit, and she's like, yeah, this is this kind of story that should go here. It feels kind of deliberate. Like, again, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And a few of the stories in here do, including the next one we're going to talk about. And I just kind of feel like I admire this quite a bit, actually, in a way. And I read it a couple of times, and yeah, the first time I'm like, I'm not sure. This is some weird obsession, creepy stuff. And the second time I read it, especially the end there, and some of the endings of these stories are very effective. So in the ending here, she's gone back downstairs to her apartment, and she's sitting in her room, and she knows that her voyeurism, because she's been in the upstairs room for like hours, just sitting there watching him, and she's even been like eating food and stuff like that while he's there, and not knowing that she's there like hiding in his closet or something like that. He accidentally is able to see her for a second, and she runs out, and obviously she's a lot quicker than him because he's like really, really big and slow. And she goes downstairs and she hides in her room, and you can kind of picture her there, sitting there and breathing really fast, and she's kind of like, is he coming downstairs? Is he coming downstairs? If I was him, I would definitely come downstairs, but I'm not. What's he gonna do, right? And it just kind of leaves us like that. Maybe her name, people know who she is. She was writing at the Clarion West workshop and stuff like that, and Harlan Ellison was really, into her writing and stuff like that, and I don't know, the fact that she is willing to push out that far and stuff like that, and yeah, maybe it's not science fiction, but I can see how it fits in here. As a challenge, and now in 2026, I'm looking at this story and being like, it's not a challenge maybe in the same way as it was in 1967, but I'm still kind of feeling it. So, yeah, I liked it. Interesting piece. I think we all probably should read more of hers.
Yeah.
But then we get Damon Knight's story, Shall the Dust Freeze Thee. I read this recently, actually, in the 100 Great Short science fiction stories edited by Isaac Asimov. I believe he put this in here. This story wasn't new to me. I'd actually read most of that anthology too, like many years ago. And yeah, this is kind of one of the religious theme stories. And I like Damon Knight, and definitely Damon Knight as an editor and a writer is very significant. And again, there's a Twilight Zone connection here. But yeah, I don't know. This story didn't do a lot for me. It's short. It's fine. This is a perfect example of a C story for me. It's fine for what it was.
Yeah, I didn't like it. I give this one a D. To me, it feels just like pure filler, and I think Damon Knight even admits that it's pure filler in the introduction or the afterword or whatever it is.
Yeah, Ellison was really
yeah, the Ellison introduction is really funny because he just insults
Yes.
Damon Knight the entire time. Damon Knight just said that he couldn't sell a story anywhere, so he just shuffled it off on Harlan, I guess as payback for all the insults, or maybe the insults were payback for that. So it's just funny getting that back and forth between the two of them.
Yeah. No, I think that, to me, the most interesting part of this was the intro and afterword, where I love Ellison saying that he would have preferred if Kate Willem Knight's wife was there.
Yeah, what's all that about?
He's like, I'd rather have a story from her. I thought this was probably one of my favorite intros just because I thought that was really funny. If it was just a story, I may have given it a C, but I feel almost insulted by Damon Knight's afterward. The fact that he's also like, I don't really believe in this, but if you do believe in it, maybe this is a dangerous vision. I know that when we were talking about PKD, he also said he didn't really believe in some of the aspects of his story, but at least there was more to it than just that religious aspect, where here it's just Damon Knight hashing in, not really adding anything to the discussion, I guess, this collection. I think I would give this one a D. I didn't really feel this story, and apparently neither did Damon Knight.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think I've read other Damon Knight stories that I thought were much more dangerous than this. And it's weird, too, sometimes reading Ellison's introductions and kind of going to myself, how much is he joking here? How much is he... He gets Kate Wilhelm in the next one, so
yeah,
he's probably happy either way. And, of course, Damon Knight should be here. I mean, bringing science fiction into modernism and what became the so-called New Wave, the Orbit anthologies edited by Damon Knight are considered very important, and a lot of the writers who we see in these show up in the Orbit anthologies too, right? It makes sense. That makes perfect sense. So it makes perfect sense that Knight is in here, but I don't know, maybe there's some rivalry with Ellison? What kind of rivalry? We can only speculate. Again, I feel like this was fine, but if Knight really wanted to make a story that would stand out in this anthology of dangerous visions, he could have done more. He could have done better. This was just the very typical cosmic science fiction, also relating to the ancients. I guess the Del Rey story was a little bit similar in a way. This kind of thing had been around for a while. It's 1967. We don't need to be sitting here questioning the tenets of Christianity that much. It worked. And again, it did have a little bit of that melancholy feeling to it that I think some of the best stories in here have, but I just don't think it was very emotional. It was too much like a vignette that didn't have any real substance to it. So yeah, a C story for me. Not a D story. I didn't hate it. And in fact, as we go through this, it's harder and harder to talk about really, really negative feelings about too many of these. But okay, next. I got a really important question for you guys. The question is, if all men were brothers, would you let one marry your sister?